Hell, everyone. Not dark, but black in the way polished stone reflects nothing. Above it, the stars hung low and steady, as if they had been placed there by careful hands and would not move until morning gave permission. Men slept in the workers' village beyond the mud walls. Donkeys breathed softly. A dog lifted its head once, listened to nothing, and slept again. Only one person was awake. His name was Kamwaset. He did not wake early because he wanted to. He woke because the temple woke before the world. Every morning, long before sunrise, someone had to walk into the darkness and prepare the house of the sun god, not when the sun arrived, but before it was even imagined by the horizon, that someone was him. He stepped onto the packed earth street. The air held the coolness that Egypt possessed only for a brief moment each day, a fragile coolness already fading. In a few hours the stones would burn, but not yet. He carried a small oil lamp. Its flame was gentle, not meant to conquer darkness, only to exist within it. The temple stood ahead, massive, silent, patient. It did not belong to humans. Humans merely attended it. He reached the gate and paused, not from fear, from habit, because before entering, he had to become smaller than himself. He set down the lamp, washed his hands from a clay jar, then wiped them on clean linen. Every morning the same ritual. Every morning the same water-touching skin that would soon sweat under the rising sun. Only then did he open the door, and the temple accepted him. Chapter 2. The God still sleeps. Inside, the air never changed. Outside, the desert shifted, winds erased footprints, floods reshaped the riverbanks. But inside the sanctuary, the air felt old and unmoving, like a breath held for centuries. He walked through columns painted with lotus flowers no one living had painted. The artists were long gone, yet their colors remained more patient than memory. At the deepest chamber stood a small shrine, and inside the shrine, the statue, not large, not dramatic. A figure of the sun god seated, hands resting calmly, expression neither kind nor cruel. At night the god slept, and it was Kamwaset's duty to wake him, not metaphorically, literally. He placed bread beside the statue, then beer, then fresh water. The god must wake to breakfast. He whispered the morning words, not loudly, not passionately, but gently, the way one wakes a child who must rise early. Because to Egyptians, the gods were not distant creators, they were residents, and residents required care. He anointed the statue with oil so the god's skin would not dry. He dressed it in fresh linen so the god would greet the sun properly clothed. Outside, the horizon had begun to pale. Morning was coming, but only after the god was ready. Chapter 3. The sun is allowed to rise. Kamwaset climbed the eastern stairs to the roof. Here the sky opened fully, a wide band of deep blue softening into gray. For a few minutes each day, Egypt belonged to silence. No workers shouted, no market argued, no boats cut water, even the river waited. He stood barefoot on cool stone, then slowly, the first line of gold appeared across the desert. The sun did not burst upward. It arrived carefully, and as it rose, the temple walls began to glow. Not bright, but warm, like bread near an oven. He raised both hands, not dramatically, simply acknowledging, the god had awakened. Below, the city would soon believe the sun rose by nature, but Kamwaset knew better. First the temple prepared the god. Then the god prepared the sky. He stayed until the disk cleared the horizon completely. Only then was the day permitted to begin. Chapter 4. The People of the Day. By mid-morning, Egypt transformed. Children ran beside irrigation canals. Bakers shouted over prices. Fishermen argued about nets they would repair the same way regardless. No one thought about the temple now. That was its purpose. Stability unnoticed. Kamwasit walked home through the village streets. The smell of baking barley bread replaced the cold scent of stone corridors. A woman asked him if the day would be hot. He said yes. He always said yes. In Egypt, tomorrow was predictable. Sunrise, heat. Sunset, cool. The certainty comforted people, more than happiness ever could. He ate, slept briefly, and returned at afternoon. Because just as the god must wake gently, the god must also sleep gently. Chapter 5. The Evening That Repeats. Forever at sunset, the world softened again. Workers stopped mid-task without discussion. The river turned copper. Birds crossed the sky in straight, purposeful lines, as if remembering somewhere important. He entered the temple a second time. Morning rituals fed the god for life. Evening rituals protected the god from darkness. He removed the daytime clothes from the statue, cleaned dust from its face, closed the shrine doors carefully. Night was dangerous, not for humans, but for order itself. Egyptians believed chaos prowled after sunset, searching for cracks in existence. The temple prevented those cracks. He sealed the chamber. Outside, stars returned to their earlier positions, perfectly familiar. The same stars, the same ritual, the same tomorrow waiting patiently. Kamwaset stepped out and extinguished his lamp, because now the darkness belonged to the Yah. Sky again, and his work was finished. Final lines, sleep-ending tone. He lay down on his mat. Beyond the walls, the Nile flowed as it had before him and would long after him, and somewhere deep in the temple the gods slept peacefully, not because gods never fear the night, but because someone always woke before dawn to care for them. Tomorrow, he would wake again, before the sun, before the world, before history remembered his name, and Egypt would continue, quietly, unchanged, forever. By midday, the village disappeared. Not physically. The mud houses still stood. The palm trees still leaned toward the river. But movement stopped. Egypt, for a short time each day, surrendered to the sun. Even the insects quieted. Kamwaset sat beneath a woven reed shade beside his doorway. The air did not move. Breathing felt like drinking warm water. Across the courtyard, his neighbor slept with his arm over his eyes, not from laziness, but from wisdom. No one fought the noon sun. Only travelers did, and travelers learned quickly. From inside the house came the faint smell of lentils cooling in a clay bowl. He did nothing. That was the task of noon. Egyptians understood time differently. Morning was for labor, evening was for conversation, night was for gods. But midday belonged to endurance, a silent agreement between humans and the sky. A boy walked past carrying water jars too large for his shoulders. Halfway across the street he stopped and waited in the shade of a wall. No one hurried him. The day was long enough for all things. Kamwaset closed his eyes but did not sleep. He listened. The Nile could not be seen from his doorway, yet he always knew it was there. A distant wet sound, like fabric slowly folding. The river never rested. Therefore Egypt never feared tomorrow. After a time that could not be measured, a small wind arrived from the west. It did not cool the air, but it reminded the skin that movement still existed. The worst of the heat had passed. Soon the afternoon tasks would begin again. Chapter 7. Letters that will outlive stone when the shadows grew long enough to stand. Upon Kamwaset returned to the temple, not to the sanctuary, but to a smaller chamber along the inner court. Here worked the scribes. The room smelled of papyrus and soot ink. Light entered through a narrow opening near the ceiling and struck the floor in a bright rectangle that moved slowly across the day like a patient animal. A young apprentice bowed slightly when Kamwaset entered. More inventory records, the boy said softly, as if loud voices might disturb the hieroglyphs already written. Kamwaset nodded and sat. He was not a priest of great rank. He did not advise nobles. He did not interpret dreams. His duty was steadiness, rituals and records, the quiet spine of a temple that could not forget anything. Before him lay a scroll listing offerings given over the past month: grain, onions, beer jars, linen, small carved amulets. Every item recorded so the god would remember generosity. He dipped the reed pen into ink. Writing was slower than speech and therefore more truthful. Each symbol required intention. Each line ensured that a moment would refuse to vanish. Outside, empires would someday rise and fall. Armies would march. Kings would be replaced, but a jar of beer offered on a hot afternoon would remain, captured in careful marks, surviving longer than the hands that poured it. The apprentice asked, "Do the gods read?" Kamwaset considered. "No," he said gently, "but the world does." The boy seemed satisfied. Children often were, when answers sounded older than they were. They worked until the sunlight rectangle left the floor entirely and climbed the opposite wall. That was the sign. Writing belonged today. Soon, the temple would belong to evening. Chapter 8. The boat without sailors. At dusk he walked to the river. Many villagers gathered there, not speaking loudly, not celebrating, simply existing beside the water as the heat withdrew from the land. Boats drifted near the shore, tied loosely to wooden posts. None would travel tonight. Night travel belonged to spirits and officials, and neither required fishermen. Across the Nile, the desert hills glowed deep orange before fading toward purple. Tombs rested there, entire cities of the unmoving, their doorways facing west, where the sun ended its journey. A man beside him said, "The dead follow the river too." Kamwaset nodded. Everyone knew this. By day the Nile flowed north. By night the souls flowed west. The same journey, different travelers. Children skipped stones. An old woman hummed without melody. A heron stood motionless for so long it seemed. Carved, Egypt never chased beauty. It waited, and beauty arrived.
It began without announcement. No trumpet. No priestly decree. No messenger running through the village. Only a subtle change in the river's voice. Kamwaset noticed it before most. Each dawn, after greeting the sun, he would pause briefly at the eastern wall where the Nile could be glimpsed between palm trunks. For months the water had moved with steady obedience, keeping to its banks like a disciplined animal, but now it pressed slightly higher, not dramatic, just enough to touch a darker line of mud it had not reached since last year. Flood season was coming. In Egypt, the flood was not feared. It was awaited. Without it, there would be no grain. Without grain, no bread. Without bread, no offerings. Without offerings, no ritual. Without ritual, no sunrise. Everything connected back to the river. By afternoon, the villagers were speaking quietly about it. Farmers walked to inspect boundary markers. Children were warned not to play too near the banks. Boats were checked for cracks. There was no panic, only preparation. Kamwaset returned to the temple that evening and added a small prayer to the usual words. Let the waters rise, properly, not too little, not too much. Balance was the only true miracle Egypt ever asked for. Within days, the transformation began. The Nile spread outward like ink-soaking papyrus. Brown water crept into fields that had been dry and cracked only a week before. Barley stalks vanished beneath the surface. Irrigation ditches became indistinguishable from the river itself. Villagers moved livestock to higher ground. Children watched in awe as familiar pathways dissolved into shimmering reflections of sky. From the temple roof, Kamwaset could see nothing but water stretching across the floodplain. It looked like a second river had appeared beside the first, calm, silent, purposeful. This was not destruction. It was renewal. The mud carried by the flood would settle thick and dark, richer than any soil could become alone. When the waters withdrew months later, seeds would be pressed into ground that remembered distant mountains. The apprentice scribe asked him, "Does the god cause the flood?" Kamwaset answered carefully, "The river causes the flood. The god allows the river." The boy nodded as if understanding. Perhaps he did. Perhaps no one truly did. Understanding was not required. Participation was. That evening, as the sun lowered, into a horizon of water instead of sand, the reflection doubled its brilliance. Two suns seemed to descend, one in sky, one beneath. The temple glowed brighter than usual. Flood season had begun, life adjusted. Boats replaced footpaths. Neighbors visited by paddling rather than walking. The village, once defined by streets of packed earth, now resembled a quiet harbor. Kayamwaset borrowed a small wooden skiff each morning to reach the temple gates. The water lapped gently against stone foundations that had stood through countless floods before. Nothing in Egypt was built without expectation of water. Inside the temple, rituals continued unchanged. That was their purpose. Even as the world shifted outside, the god must wake at the same hour, receive the same bread, wear the same linen. Consistency calmed the flood, or perhaps the flood calmed itself. It was difficult to know. One afternoon, as he returned home by boat, he passed farmers standing in water up to their knees, laughing, because they knew what this meant. In months to come, harvest would be generous. Storage jars would fill. Hunger would retreat further into memory. The flood did not take, it gave. And so Egypt did not fear rising waters. It measured them. During flood season, temple duties increased. More offerings arrived. Small tokens of gratitude from villagers, hopeful for balanced waters. Amulets shaped like frogs, symbols of renewal, were placed at the shrine entrance. Senior priests from neighboring temples visited by boat, their white linen garments lifted above ankles as they stepped carefully onto wet stone. They spoke in low tones about river levels and celestial patterns. Some carried measuring rods marked with notches. Others consulted records from years long past. Flood height was recorded with precision. Too low meant famine. Too high meant homes lost. Balance again. Kamwaset listened but did not interrupt. His role remained humble. He prepared oil lamps, refreshed water bowls, ensured that the god's chamber remained untouched by damp air. One priest asked him quietly, "How many floods have you seen?" "Enough," he replied. It was the truest answer possible. Years blended during flood season. Each rise felt familiar. Each retreat felt inevitable. That night, after sealing the shrine, he stood longer than usual beneath the stars. Somewhere beyond the dark horizon, rains were falling in lands he would never see. Those distant storms were already deciding Egypt's future. Yet here, beneath calm skies, everything felt steady. Such was the nature of the Nile. As waters slowly began to withdraw weeks later, leaving behind thick black earth, talk in the village shifted toward something quieter: death. Not because flood brought tragedy, it rarely did, but because renewal reminded people of cycles. Plant, grow, harvest, die. Egyptians did not view death as disappearance. It was relocation, in sea. The temple's inner court stood a small chamber where funerary texts were kept. Papyrus scrolls described the journey after breath, the weighing of the heart against the feather of truth. Kamwaset had copied those texts many times. The heart must be lighter than falsehood, not free of mistakes, free of imbalance. Just as the river must rise neither too high nor too low, the soul must tip neither toward cruelty nor excess. Balance governed both earth and eternity. One evening, a villager approached him quietly. "My father grows weak," the man said. "Will the god remember him?" Kamwaset answered gently. "If his heart is steady, The scales will not forget. The man bowed and left calmer than he arrived. That was often the purpose of priests, not to remove fear, but to soften it. Eventually, almost imperceptibly, the flood retreated. Boats were pulled, back onto dry ground. Fields reemerged beneath thick layers of shining black mud. Farmers stepped barefoot into it, pressing seeds into soil that would soon burst with green. The village rebuilt its pathways. Life resumed its pattern: morning labor, noon endurance, evening stories, night rituals. From the temple roof, Kayem Waset watched new chutes appear across the plain. What had been reflective water now shimmered with possibility. He felt no pride. The flood did not require his guidance. The sun did not require his greeting, yet he would greet it tomorrow, because continuity was Egypt's greatest architecture. He returned inside and prepared the shrine for sleep once more. The god rested. The river flowed within its banks again, and beyond the western hills, tombs waited patiently for future occupants, not with menace, but with promise. Life, flood, harvest, death, repeat, as it had before him, as it would after him. The night settled gently over the land. Stars took their places, and somewhere in the quiet temple, beneath layers of stone older than memory, a statue dressed in linen waited calmly for morning. Kayem Waset lay upon his mat once more, breathing slow, knowing that tomorrow, before the world stirred, he would wake and Egypt would begin again.